This chat is more of a positioning chat than a historical chat. But I wanted to, I woke up this morning and on Instagram, several people had pushed to me, friends, this, that, or the other about what Israel is doing or isn't doing. And it just strikes me that we have to parse through a lot of information, and honestly there's no way right now to tell, well, in my opinion, what is definitely real or isn't real, or there's just a lot of fog of war around events all over the world, really. And so I wanted to frame the questions that are before us and just say some positioning things. And one of them is that my audience is not the person standing in front of a synagogue or a university with a sign that says genocide. That's not who I'm trying to have a conversation with. The person that I'm trying to have a conversation with is a believer, Christian, who is trying to make a thoughtful decision about the things that are happening in our world, as it relates to Israel, and not just Israel the nation, but the Jewish people in general. And I think that what we believe about the Jewish people or about Israel defines or will define eventually how we behave towards them. And so that's really an underlying point in a lot of these talks, is that the people in this generation believed this, and therefore their actions looked like this. And so that's part of the conversation I want to have, is let's really be thoughtful about what we believe as it relates to the Jewish people. And the underlying question is I think does Israel have the right to exist? And then once you've settled that in your mind, it is a prism through which you can look at everything with. And so if Israel has the right to exist, then when people say things like we want to push them into the sea, which is basically saying we want them to not exist, then you perceive that through the lexicon of, but they have the right to exist. And the same would go with if someone trespasses their borders and molests their people, as happened in last October, then you perceive that through a nation that has the right to defend themselves. Now, I want to say I don't think that any nation makes completely perfect decisions and is always right tactically or politically. And I'm not here to say Israel is perfect and above repute in every single decision they make. But what I am contending is that how we perceive that, how we think of Israel is important. And so at a minimum, if we could see them as fellow human beings and not any of the epitaphs that have negatively followed them for 2 millenniums, or beyond that, how I see them, which is a people who have a covenant with God that is biblically based, that is part of our own fabric, the fabric of Christianity, and is important to the fabric of what we believe God's plans are. So from I'm going to do a lot of talk, so this is just a quick kind of walk through. But if on the right to exist, there's first of all, the right to exist from just a humanitarian position, and the fact that they have experienced a level of racism and violence against them throughout, all the countries in the West, and all of the, and in the East, some in the East. And so they've experienced violence, they've experienced, horrible treatment, and financially, they're being blocked out of the economy. So they've had systemic racism across all countries, not a particular country, but all of them have put some level of framework around them as being a drag on society. And so for that reason, just a humanitarian reason, they deserve, and I feel like that justifies a nation of their own. And then when you look at what happened after World War II, and 6 million Jews were murdered, and yet no nation would let them immigrate. The United States wouldn't take a mass immigration, or even hardly a small immigration pool, nor would the UK, nor would, they couldn't go back to Germany. Germany did not want them back in spite of everything that had happened. Russia, and you could go around. So where were they going to go? We moved them from concentration camps in Germany, where they were being slaughtered, into basically, retention camps run by the Allies. No one was trying to kill them, but they were still imprisoned. And so the question becomes, well, of course they deserve a place on the earth to go. And they have a historical context this was their land. They were driven from it. And they coalesced as a people and existed as a people in spite of the fact that their actual nation that they came from, they couldn't go back to. And so I feel like from that standpoint, which is a historical and also a historical, geographic, and humanitarian. And then the kind of the next layer on top of that is, if you believe, I have a high view of the Bible, and I default to literal interpretations where possible and not allegorical. And I believe there was a covenant cut between Abraham and God, and it involved land. And I believe, God put him to sleep. And God cut the covenant. I believe it's not, there are conditional covenants, but the covenant about the land wasn't one of them. It's a non-conditional covenant. It was theirs. Now, their ability to keep it had conditions in the Mosaic, but it was given to them. The land is theirs. That's what I believe biblically. As a Christian, I believe that that's what the Bible says. And so you just take, as a believer, and take a minute and look at that context. God gave them this land, that we humans treated them horribly, systemically racist, violent racist for 2,000 years, and they didn't have anywhere to go. And so just as a human, they deserve a nation. And so, and we'll talk about the rewriting of history, if you will, around why some of the questions that are still troubling the whole world in relation to Israel and Palestine and all of that. So that we'll talk about that more. But that, as a believer, or just a human, is the framework. So if they have the right to exist as a nation, then we don't require of them a perfect political, tactical decision-making process, or else they need to be pushed into the sea. No other nation is required. That's required of them, and no other nation is many nations have had political tumult, and both sides are imperfect, or maybe one is completely evil. There's a perspective that we need to parse through. And I think that sometimes we just jump, not we, but what I want to say is, don't jump to automatic conclusions based on political parties, or people yelling on the news, or some news clip taken completely out of context, or even maybe not even based on what's happening right now. Maybe not even based on that. Let's make our views be based on a thoughtful consideration of all that's happened, and if they have the right to exist, then let's help figure out how they exist in the context of everything that's happening. So that's the positioning statement before we go on to my next set of talks, which is about Zionism and the men that began to realize that assimilation was just never going to work. It just wasn't going to work. The roots of the hatred towards them was too great. They needed their own nation.